Good morning, everybody, and thank you very much, Professor, for this very kind presentation. I have to say that I'm coming here with a lot of emotion because I was in 2010. It was several months after my election as the first woman Director General of UNESCO. Ivor University invited me to make a lecture and gave me Doctor Honoris Causa. It was on the 24th of May 2010, and for me it's a kind of a coming back to your great institution, because I know how much you promote gender equality, education, I would say, very open-minded and open to the world. My today's lecture is about global citizenship and global citizenship education, mostly, and of course about the spirit of UNESCO. And I thought it's important, first and foremost, to give you a broader kind of a view about Sustainable Development Agenda that the United Nations adopted in 2015, about what education brings to this agenda, and then focusing on the issue of global citizenship, because we know that in this very interconnected and globalized world, the issue of global citizenship is becoming more and more important. And I would like to say that I'm very pleased also to be here. I spent a lot of time in Seoul, in your country, which I have visited many times, currently as an honorary dean of Humanities College in Kyunhee University, but sitting also on the board of the Ban Ki-moon Center, your eminent compatriot, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, who established an organization called Ban Ki-moon Center for Global Citizens, and he was kindly, kindly invited me to sit on the board of this organization, where also we deal with the issues of global citizenship. Now, trying to move the... Maybe somebody could help me, doesn't move. I'm so sorry. It's okay? Yeah. I just wanted to go back to 2015, when the United Nations adopted the Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda for Sustainable Development, with the 17 goals, which was a huge effort by the international community to make a very ambitious agenda for sustainability, for the world, for the planet. As you will see, that the main, I would say, prerequisite of it was to move on with the Millennium Development Goals and to make a very comprehensive agenda which is universal, both for developed and for developing countries, and also encompasses all the different areas of social and economic development. It is, as you see, about poverty alleviation, it is about the zero hunger, it is about the health, it is about goal number 4, the education, which I will then move on much more into the details. It's about gender equality, which is very much linked also to education. It is about the clean water and sanitation, the big agenda about the water and water security nowadays in the world. It is about the energy, very much also linked to the agenda of climate change and protecting of biodiversity. It is about the economic growth and decent work, and then about the industrial development, about innovation and everything that new technologies bring to the world. Goal number 10, which is also an overarching goal about reducing inequalities, because unfortunately we see in the world of rising inequalities, which is sometimes may seem paradoxical, because we have a lot of science, a lot of innovation, a lot of growth in many parts of the world, but this doesn't mean that inequalities are not reducing. There are countries where inequalities are reducing, but not that many. And also globally, I would say, divides among different regions, and new divides are coming, like the digital divide, for example. So we really have to look at this problem of inequalities in a broader sense, not just GDPs per capita. Then, of course, it's about the cities, sustainable cities, because we know that more and more the population is moving towards big urban agglomerations. I think you also feel this pressure here in Seoul. And we know that if nowadays 55% of the global population lives in cities, by 2050 it will be reached, maybe 2/3 of the population will go in cities, and what to do with the rural areas and how to cope with the big urban developments is a big problem. Then of course it's the consumption and production. It's not by chance that we speak about responsible. It's once again linked to the issues of inequalities. It's linked to the issues of biodiversity, to climate change. Then, of course, the climate action 13, which is linked to the Paris Agreement on climate change. There is a very close link between the goal number 13 and the Paris Agreement. And you know now that with the alarming, I would say, recent report of the International Panel on Climate Change that was released just a month and a half ago, there is a renewed need for a political action on climate. Then, of course, it's the ocean, goal number 14, another big area of debate, and I think the Republic of Korea is a very active participant in the ocean, I would say, debates about sustainability of the ocean. In my previous capacity as Director General of UNESCO, last year we adopted a decision, we launched the decade, United Nations decade for science about the ocean. I think it's very important that because ocean, we all know, plays a hugely important role in climate, in food security also, in energy, in biodiversity. And for the first time, the United Nations put such a goal on oceans, goal number 14. Then, of course, it's about the forests, it's about, it's called life on land, but it's about protecting the biodiversity. It's not by chance that tree is written on this. Then goal number 16, which is an encompassing goal about the governance, I would say, what kind of institutions countries have to establish in order to have good governance, in order to have justice, in order to have the political structures so that all the other sustainable development goals are being implemented. It was a very, I would say, difficult to achieve such a common understanding because of the different political implications, but finally I think goal number 16 was adopted, and it is an important goal. It's about human rights, it's about societies, it's about good governance, and it's a very important goal. And the 17, of course, it's about partnerships. It's equally important because it recognizes that the achievement of the Sustainable Development Agenda cannot be done only by governments. Of course, it's a prime responsibility of governments, but it is recognized that the challenges nowadays, it's overarching, and if we want to achieve, let's say, climate change, reducing the emissions and finding solutions for some of these problems, we need the private sector, definitely. Without the private sector, we cannot achieve some of the oceans, some of the decisions about the oceans, or the industry, about the innovation. We need also a very strong partner on the scientific community, on the academia, and this is also one of the partners, or the civil society, if we want to change mentalities in certain issues. So partnerships, it was a very important goal that it was set so that all parts of a society participates in such global debates. Now, I will move to this is an overall view about the Sustainable Development Agenda, which I think it's probably the most ambitious agenda ever adopted by humanity, I would say, in order to reach sustainability on the planet. And just one word about sustainability. What is sustainability? And this, I believe, permeates the Agenda 2030 of the United Nations. Sustainability is about putting the dots together, as I would say, between the economic, the social, and the environmental issues. And it is for the first time that humanity united around this vision that all three elements have to work together: the economy, the social, and the environmental concern. And it's a huge achievement of the United Nations, and I would say it goes also to the legacy and the credit of the former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. As I said, your eminent compatriot. It was under his leadership, under his tenure as Secretary General, that this Agenda 2015 was adopted. And I say it with the, I would say, the full conviction of my words, because in my former capacity as Director General of UNESCO, I participated actively in the adoption of this agenda. And as you know, UNESCO's mandate is very wide, because it is the United Nations Agency for Education, Culture, Science, and Communication, where we host, of course, UNESCO is the leader in education, and I will speak a little bit more about it, but also through the different programs within the science sector. We have a relevance towards at least 9 of these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. UNESCO hosts the International Hydrological Program, the Biosphere Program about biosphere reserves. Of course, we have a lot in terms of urban development through our Culture and Heritage Program. Our overarching priority is gender equality, and also we work through the MOST program, which is managing of the social transformation programs. We have a lot to do also with the inequalities and how to bridge the inequalities. UNESCO hosts the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission. That is why the oceans issue about the science about the oceans is very much also UNESCO's domain. And of course, I can continue this long list. Now, I would like to move then to the education. So, oh, sorry. Right. So, I would like to start with education, because we at UNESCO, as the lead agency for education, of course, have been leading the global thinking about education. And I started also with these famous words of Nelson Mandela, the South African hero and political leader and great humanist, who said that this is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And nowadays it may seem to us, and of course Korea, because Korea, we know, has been a very big advocate for education, and I know and I have often given the example of Korea, which through education transformed the country from a developing country, from a, I would say, one of the least developed countries suffering from the war, and then investing in education and moving not just to a donor country within the organization of OECD, but also as a cutting-edge technological country with innovation and leading the world in with its private sector, but also, I would say, in its science and technology. And it was not by chance that here in 2015 in Incheon, we, UNESCO, organized with partners our Education Forum 2015, where the goal number 4 of Agenda 2015 was formulated. And it was about promoting inclusive and equitable quality education and lifelong learning for all. It was a historic moment, a declaration that was adopted here at Incheon. As I said here in my presentation, I think it reflected something that goes very deep into the Korean society of why education is so important. In this declaration, it was recognized that education is a human right, of course, and it was important for sustainability of all development. It was also recognized that it was important for social inclusion, and not just for social inclusion, but for deeper inclusion in a society. It was equally recognized that education is critical for gender equality and women's empowerment, and I will show further on why we included this. For you, it may be obvious. You're in a women's university that has contributed so much also with its long history of girls' education and women's education, but it is not like that in many parts in the world still. And also we recognize that quality education is a major prerequisite for economic growth and prosperity. And why I emphasize this also here, it is because it was not always, even before that, before the adoption of this goal, quality education was not that much discussed, debated. Only after a very deep reflection, we saw that even in countries where the access to education was ensured, with the poor quality of education, it was not achieving the main, I would say, goal of it, of giving economic opportunities, of social inclusion. And for the first time, the United Nations put this as a goal of quality education. And then also we inscribed this very important prerequisite once again, that education is vital for the protection of the planet and biodiversity and tackling the challenges of climate change, because the, and I will come later a little bit on this, UNESCO was leading a decade education for sustainable development, which is one of the targets of the education goal, is vital. We cannot deal with the issues of climate and biodiversity if we do not change our mentality, and by changing the, on one side, of course, the business model, which is the goal of the Paris Climate Agreement, the private sector, the business model, but we also have to change our overall approach towards how we consume and what is our attitude towards climate. And of course, the last, which is equally important, that education is vital for peace and mutual understanding, for living together as global citizens. Because we know that education is so important of shaping a young mind, of what kind of attitude it will have further on in terms of conflict prevention, in terms of living together, in terms of preventing some of the, I would say, stereotyping, and in many parts of the world we see, unfortunately, rising xenophobia, discrimination, and education for peace is equally important. And I think also you know from your own experience here on the Korean Peninsula how important, once again, this type of education is. So when we speak about the targets, because every single goal in the Sustainable Development Agenda has specific targets, and if you have 17 Sustainable Development Goals, overall there are 169 targets. Each one of the goals have targets. And now here I would like to mention what are the goals of the education targets. But before moving to the specific targets, I would say the overarching ambition, and what we for the first time inscribed into goal number 4, is the 12 years of free education for all. I think it was a total revolution, and still is, into the global approach towards education. Because before that, it was considered that the most important for the developing countries, of course, was primary education. And everybody was focusing only on primary education. The World Bank, the Millennium Development Goals, and others were considered that primary education is enough. But after so much research that we at UNESCO did with the global monitoring reports, and we have an Institute of Statistics, we found out that because of the poor quality of education, if you just have primary education, you have millions, hundreds of millions of children in the world that formally have gone through some kind of primary education, but functionally they're illiterate. And this aggravates the situation all over the world, because they do not have economic prospects, they do not know anything about the environment, as we said, they functionally illiterate, they do not have the sensitivities towards, I would say, the others, and that is why we consider that this was one of the main problems even in some countries where there is conflict and others, that poor quality of education and sitting only on primary levels was one of the problems. And then, of course, if you don't have secondary education, not to speak about universities, where do you take teachers? Where do you take qualified teachers in order to ensure that you have a quality education? Which led us to the next target that we had, to have a qualified and duly trained teachers in every classroom. So now this becomes one of the biggest, I would say, concerns also in the developed countries, to focus on teachers, on better trained teachers, on teachers that inspire students, teachers that are not just passing the information, because nowadays everything changes in the classroom, and being a university, you know probably this better than me and your professors, but particularly in schools, it is a different way of communicating to the students. The third one is a strong focus on technical vocational training, because in some countries there was too much emphasis on higher education and not sufficient emphasis on skills, on technical vocational training. And there are countries, for example, I can give you in the Arab world, countries which have lots of unemployed high students, graduates from universities, but not sufficient technicians, not sufficient students that have skills in order to to participate in the economy developing. So there is a huge demand in many countries for the technical vocational training. And then, of course, global citizens, and I will speak about global citizenship education before. And then we are coming to the financing of education, which was a big also topic, not just for education, but financing for sustainable development, for the agenda. But in terms of education, it was a breach that we had to have the 40 billion funding gap if we want to all kids to go to school and to pass 12 years. Then the recommendation overall was to have at least, it's between 4 and 6% of gross domestic product for education, and the goal of education to stand at 0.7% of the official development assistance. Now, I will briefly go to the targets, but we have, of course, the targets that were put here. As I said, it is about ensuring that all girls and boys complete primary and secondary education. Then, of course, it's that they have to access a quality early childhood development. There was a lot of it's for the first time also we put as a target the early childhood development and education, which is a new opening also to many countries which lack early childhood care and education. And this also is partly linked once again to the gender equality, because if there are facilities for early childhood care and education, then parents, and mostly women in many parts of the world, could also pursue their career. So everything is interlinked. Then, of course, it's about the equal access of women and men to this technical, vocational and tertiary education, including universities, linked to the goal number 5. Then it's about skills, because we speak about skills, and if nowadays They say what is the biggest problem and how we solve the issues about changing economies, about sometimes transforming jobs, because it's constantly transforming jobs. It's about skilling, and that is why we're speaking, I will come to that, about lifelong learning, also the concept that we introduced. It's about reskilling constantly in order to adapt to the new economic environment. It is the last one. And then, of course, it's about eliminating gender disparities, because we, not just gender disparities, but we speak also about people with disabilities, another big problem, and children in vulnerable situations, because I think you may know that in many countries still girls are have obstacles, bigger obstacles to go to schools for different reasons, primary level or secondary level, and if because of poverty, because of exclusion, because of lack of security in schools, because of prejudices, and even if girls go to the primary schools and a family, poor family cannot afford to send all kids to schools, they prefer to send the boy to school, so there should be a different approach towards this. And then, of course, we speak about literacy. We know that, unfortunately, literacy still is a challenge in many countries, and particularly in the middle-income countries, not just the least developed countries. Literacy is a challenge in the middle-income countries, countries like Brazil, like India, like Pakistan, like Nigeria, like Egypt, which are not least developed countries, but literacy is a problem. And still in the world there are 800 million illiterate people, which is a huge problem which hampers development in these countries, and that is why it is important. And of course we put also numeracy here, because the gender divide, as I mentioned, nowadays literacy is not enough. You have to be also literate in numeracy, because unfortunately we made a study on the gender digital divide, which is important indicator about the gender equality in societies, and we have seen that unfortunately gender divide, digital divide is not closing. It is a little bit opening. Last year we saw this, and this is a very alarming, I would say, tendency, because we know that with the new technologies, I would say everything will be decided in the area of digital technologies, artificial intelligence, and everything that is for the future economy. Then, of course, this is an important, I would say, once again, speaking about global citizenship, it's about education for sustainable development, ESD, as we call it. It is about sustainable lifestyles. It's about changing our mentality. It's about human rights, education for human rights. It is about promotion of culture of peace and mutual understanding, something that we called education for global citizenship, and we put it as a special target, education for global citizenship, to know about cultural diversity in the world, and to call how culture also contributes to sustainable development. It is a totally new concept that we launched. Now, I would like to focus on this last target, number 7, as we say it, because I think it is very much linked also to the topic of this presentation. Now, the global citizenship education is built, has built its momentum on the education for sustainable development. It is not only education for sustainable development. As I said, it is also about gender equality and human rights. It is included in the national education policies. We want that it be included into national education policies. We recommend that it's included into curricular, into the teacher education and training, and also into the student assessment. We think this is something very important if we want to have concrete practical results about it. These are some follow-ups of the goals. It is about people with disability, which we think is a very important addition, gender-sensitive and safe environments. And it is about developing countries to increase the scholarships. It's a particular emphasis on African countries. And it is about, once again, giving them access to new information and communication technologies, engineering, STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, and into the scientific programs to make better cooperation between developed and developing countries on these issues. This is, once again, about the teacher training, particularly in the developed countries, into the least developed countries, small island development states. There was a particular enter. Now, I want to come back to the issue about the girls' education, because girls' education indeed has become a strategic development priority. And you have seen probably that during the last session of the United Nations General Assembly, there was a new global initiative that was launched by 3 world leaders, by the Prime Minister of Canada, the President of France, and the Prime Minister of Chancellor of Germany on girls' and the UK also, a Prime Minister on the girls' education, because it was recognized globally, politically, that there should be a new renewed effort about gender equality, about the women's position in the society, which starts with girls' education. And from the point of view, of course, of UNESCO, in my experience, and I have visited more than 100 countries, including some of the least developed countries, the issues of gender equality is really the biggest issue about development and the issue about girls' education. Because if we don't allow the girls in these environments to develop and to study, nothing will happen afterwards, and no sustainability will achieve in society. There is a lot of studies, and I have given here also the study of the World Bank, a recent study, that the loss, I'm not speaking about how much it will cost, it will be in dozens of times less to invest in girls' education, and the cost of lost earnings and productivity. So this is the loss, is as much as 30 trillion in the world economy because of the lack of schooling of girls. So it is also economic imperative. It is not just a matter of justice. It is not just a matter of human rights, I would say, for these girls, but it is also a matter of economic, I would say, responsibility. And it makes sense, economic sense, that girls and women are included into the economy. And also we know from all the different studies that better educated women, they, of course, are healthier, their families are healthier, they have fewer children, demographics is improving in countries, they marry at a later stage, they also take better care of their children, and also they are better responsible members of their communities and of their nations, and they can get out of poverty. And I would add also to this that even in terms of environment, it is much better to have women educated in these countries because they also are much more sensitive towards issues of environment, of climate, and others. I would say that girls' education, as I said, it's not just girls going to school. It's not just, I would say, this. It has an implications, wider implications. So, it is important in some countries that there are safe schools. Countries like Pakistan, for example, when I went and I was speaking, promoting girls' education, and a woman professor, we had a meeting in one university, and she said, Director General, don't believe that families in Pakistan do not want to send their girls to schools. They want to send them, but they want to send them in safe schools. So in some countries it is about safe school. It is about completing all levels of education and about the skills. And also it is about giving them the socio-emotional, sometimes it's a very specific environment in societies, and also life skills, so that they want to go to the changing world. And I would say that this third, goal, prerequisite, is not linked also to the developing countries. I think in many societies, in many developed countries even, because of the changing economies, I think sometimes women have to be more supported to navigate through this changing environment. It is also important to give them the respective competencies and knowledge about how to navigate into a very competitive environment, which is this changing economy. And it's also to give them the opportunity to make decisions about their own lives, and of course to contribute to the communities and to the world. In what are the means of doing this? It is different means. I have just enumerated here several of them. It is conditional cash transfers, stipends, it's distance to schools. It is very important also to talk to boys and men. It is not just about women convincing women and girls. It is about including men and boys in this debate. I think this is very important. And it is important not just once again in developing countries. I spoke about challenges in the developing countries, but it's equally important in the developed world that men have to be also part of this debate, because this is a societal problem. It is not just a problem of women, it is a societal problem where the women will be included into a society on an equal par with men, and it is important that men see the benefit of this for the families and for the society, for the well-being of societies on the whole. And it is also about ensuring gender-sensitive curricular and pedagogical material. In some countries it is about qualified female teachers, as I said, environments, ending child marriages, and the last, which is equally important, is about addressing violence against girls and women, which is a big problem in many societies, not just developing countries once again. And I think now there is a renewed look into the issues of violence against girls and women, and even from the point of view of economic, I'm not speaking only about the issue of justice, of psychological, and of the, I would say, the consequences of this, but there was a study by the United Nations Women of how much economic loss for society is because of the violence against women. So it's a very complex, once again, problem. Now, I just once again have put here what are these new challenges that really require these collective solutions, and how education can respond to this. It's about the rapid development of technologies. It's about the changing of the economies, of course, knowledge-driven economies. It's about the migration in countries. Sometimes we speak about migration, but there is also the question about the rural-urban areas migration inside the countries and among the countries. It's about the growing inequalities. It's about the climate, environmental, and of course about the demographics in the world. So the answer to some of these questions, it's about this notion about global citizenship education. This concept, which has been discussed probably in the last 15, 20 years in different intellectual circles, academic institutions, finally took shape as a goal, as a target, into the goal number 4 on education that is nowadays into the Sustainable Development Agenda. It is a totally new concept for the 21st century that emerged because it was exactly about what kind of education we need for the 21st century. So the questions we want to answer is, what should be the role and purpose of education when there is a profound change, economic transformation, technological change, what education in this era of connectivity, and what education, as the founder of the Charles Schwab of the World Economic Forum, the renowned economic platform for debate, he called the Fourth Industrial Revolution, what kind of education we need for that. And we go back to some of the, I would say, some of the roots of the thinking about education. Because we have kind of forgotten that education is not simply a transfer of information. Now information is open, the access to information is global, but the Brazilian education and philosopher Paulo Freire, which is, has inspired a lot of the discussions at UNESCO, has said that education is the practice of freedom by which men and women can critically and with creatively discover and participate into the transformation of their world. He said that 30 years ago, but it's so valid nowadays, because the global citizenship education is exactly about creating, nurturing skills, knowledge about sustainable development, about peace, about human rights, about democracy, to transform this into daily behavior of tolerance and respect. So we want to see education not just as a technical transfer of information, but about creating values. And I think we are going back to initial, I would say, responsibility of education, to educate and to educate also in certain values. And there were two landmark reports in the history, for the last 50 years that have shaped this knowledge. The first was in '72, very important, which introduced the new idea about lifelong education and about a learning society, a totally new concept at the time. It said that lifelong education is the master concept for education policies for developed and developing countries. And the other report, which still is very valid, is '96. It is the Delors report. At that time, Delors, which was a prominent French politician, the president of the European Commission, it is learning, the treasures within. And it was speaking about the 4 pillars of education. It is about learning to be, it is about learning to know, it is about learning to do, and it is the learning to live together. I think all of these 4 pillars are very valid today. And then it said that it is the principal means to foster a deeper and more harmonious form of human development, and thereby to reduce poverty, exclusion, oppression, and war. And when United Nations Secretary General launched an initiative supported by UNESCO strongly in 2012, the new Education First initiative, it presented a big vision about the world, and then it transformed into goal number 4, global citizenship education, because we at UNESCO prepared the concept of this initiative, and Ban Ki-moon was chairing the steering committee. I was the executive secretary of this committee, encompassing all the other partners, agencies, and other partners. We established this as the 3rd pillar in this goal number 4. So at that time, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon spoke a lot about global citizenship education, that it should foster peace and sustainable development. When I spoke about these values, I think that nowadays it really becomes one of the, I would say, most important responsibilities of education systems to reintroduce there where there are no such notions about values, about knowledge, important knowledge, about the world, the interconnectedness. You know that there is a big debate about humanities in many universities nowadays, and how to once again reintroduce and put sufficient emphasis in humanities. It does not mean that the other sciences are not important by all means, but humanities can open also the mind of students about innovation, about imagination, about, I would say, imagining another world, which is so important nowadays, and about this notion of living together in diversity. And the global citizenship education, as I said, is not just a technical way of transferring knowledge. It should be about these kind of human values of respect of others. It's about creating a different learning environment and new forms of learning. The values, once again, about different other cultures, because in many societies that are multicultural, we see that there is a lot of strife, there is sometimes conflict among them, and it's important that there is something that we call cultural literacy, which is so important nowadays in the world. So this global citizenship education is developing nowadays. The concept is constantly developed and enlarging. Here in Seoul, there is an Asia-Pacific Institute for Peace and Education for International Understanding, UPSIU, which is under the auspices of UNESCO, and they have embraced very strongly this concept, and they're working very hard in order to promote it, in order to enlarge it, and now working also in different, not only in UPSIU, but in other also venues, includes a very interesting new cognitive domain research, which understands, to try to understand how to prepare curricula and how to work also with children in this critical thinking about the important value system of interconnectedness and interdependencies of different countries and populations. It is about the social, cognitive, social, emotional. It is about behavioral demand. It's everything linking also to the psychological research in this area, which is very important and very helpful in finding the right approaches to promote this global citizenship education. So just to finish my presentation, I think it's very important, and I believe one of the answers to the challenges that we confront nowadays in the world, of course, it's the education globally, because education connects all the other sustainable development goals. What I started in saying that without education there won't be gender equality, there won't be climate and sustainability. We need the knowledge also, knowledge-driven societies where education for sustainable development is also very well established everywhere. But we also need a global citizenship education, an education that creates a space for empathy, for solidarity in a society, for understanding about the others, for knowledge about the others. And we think this is also one of the response for the global challenges nowadays in the world. So, as I said, global citizenship education, I believe, is a bedrock of sustainability. Thank you for your attention.